So, random theology. I just wanted to jump on here and just talk for a minute my reaction about Matthew Barrett. So I would entitle this video Matthew Barrett, Simply Trinity, and Anglicanism. So news broke out that Matthew Barrett, he has changed his theological convictions from being Southern Baptist to being Anglican. And I must say that I was not surprised, only because me and another local pastor, 2 years ago, we met for lunch, and in some sense, we predicted this happening, only because of the way that Dr. Barrett was he spoke favorably about Rome, and he spoke favorably about specific practices that would be consistent with a high church tradition and not consistent with a lower church tradition like Baptist ecclesiology. So I wasn't surprised, but just thinking about it, there's been many people that have talked about Dr. Barrett's reasoning for why he left the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't want to go deep into that, but I will say that Matthew Barrett, over the years that I've had interactions with him on social media, he is, not only is he dogmatic about his views, but he is not the kind of person that exemplifies criticism and the type of dialogue that you would anticipate and expect from a scholar. There is no dialectic with him. He has his own views, and he doesn't want to hear other people criticizing his views. Maybe he has difficulty handling criticism, or maybe he has lots of criticism, and therefore he chooses not to engage in those debates. However, he blocked me on X or Twitter, and this was months back, or I guess it was a year ago. And he's done that with other people as well. And to me, that shows that he lacks either humility, or he lacks the ability to handle criticism from people that have different views than him. Which was very humorous to read, that he felt like the SBC was one-sided and imbalanced. And I found that humorous, because he did not exemplify an attitude of engaging with the opposing views. Something that's consistent within theology, the scholarly discipline, and also philosophy. Being able to handle criticisms well, and to make refinements and constructive criticism is necessary when it comes to peer review. And being able to engage others that you might disagree with, and do it on good terms. But so Dr. Barrett, he left the SBC, and I mean, in terms of the way that he handled, so he was willing to engage or argue against people that are well respected within Protestant circles. So let's talk a little bit about his book, Simply Trinity. So I read most of Dr. Barrett's book, Simply Trinity, and his book is seeking to defend Nicene Trinitarianism. And he criticizes people like Wayne Grudem, Bruce Ware, And those were I think Dr. Ware was the main foil of his book, because he didn't engage with anybody else that has differing views than him on the Trinity. Like, he didn't engage with people like Keith Yandel. He did discuss William Lane Craig briefly, but I don't think he dealt with the most sophisticated, robust model of the Trinity, like William Hasker, Scott Williams, and then I would say William Lane Craig as well, Chad McIntosh, and even people like Dr. Joshua Sijuwati and Bo Branson and others. Instead, all he did was his starting point was Thomism and his understanding of Nicene Trinitarianism, and then using that as his presupposition to argue against any view that contradicts his presuppositions. Which is fine, he can do that, but he's not engaging with the most sophisticated views that are against his view. And so what that does is it ends up not necessarily being a straw man, but being weak in terms of argumentation, because he's missing the strongest arguments against his view in favor of views that contradict his presuppositions. But he focused on Dr. Ware. So I have argued in my video reply to Mike Riccardi, and also on my 2 videos on the metaphysics of the Trinity, that Dr. Barrett's arguments against eternal functional subordination and eternal relations of authority and submission, these views, which are treated as novel by Dr. Barrett, his criticisms do not land. And that is because Dr. Barrett does not metaphysically defend his views. He assumes them and then uses them as axioms to be able to deduce contradictions. But he did not defend his metaphysics. In fact, there are defeaters of his metaphysical views. One of the criticisms that he lays against Dr. Ware is he says that Dr. Ware's view, it takes nature and person, and he says that Dr. Ware makes the person, the will, to be a property of the person instead of a property of the nature. And the point I make in some of my other videos is that, well, you have to metaphysically defend that one substance must always and necessarily have one will, because we can stipulate a substance with multiple wills, and that would not be contradiction, especially if you have other properties that would guarantee that those wills would always be in harmony. So we can imagine a substance with, let's say 3 properties, namely 3 wills, and that they are always in harmony, and that it is impossible for them to be out of harmony, right? And we can use, omniscience to be the reason why, as they all 3 know perfectly, what, and also omnisapience, wisdom, knowledge, so they'll always choose to do what is right, and also moral goodness, right? Richard Swinburne has an interesting argument for this that can be made on why their wills would always be in conformity. But this particular point is that Dr. Ware is within his rights to argue for his view. I'm not saying that I agree with it, but it's consistent, and it is unscathed by Matthew Barrett's criticisms. And Dr. Ware could make even additional arguments in favor of his view, but the point is Dr. Barrett does not deal with the metaphysics involved in the Trinity. He presupposes Thomistic metaphysics, which is fine, but he needs to defend them against other metaphysical views, which he does not do in his book, Simply Trinity. And also, there is a parallel on this in terms of defending divine simplicity. Dr. Ware does not defend, or pardon me, Dr. Barrett does not defend divine simplicity against Dr. Ware. He assumes it. He thinks that you must have divine simplicity in order to be able to have divine aseity. And that does not logically follow. That's a non sequitur. Look at my video of aseity without simplicity. And also look at Chad McIntosh's newest paper on triseity. You can have divine aseity without divine simplicity, as understood by Thomas Aquinas. If you have divine simplicity as understood by John Duns Scotus, I have no arguments or no qualms against that. I think that's defensible. And even the Cappadocian fathers seem to understand that divine simplicity is not the same thesis as numerical identity between God's properties and God's person. There's clearly a distinction, a formal distinction of sorts, such that God's essence and God's existence are not numerically identical. They are, in fact, numerically distinct, but inseparable and necessary, logically necessary, and that would be consistent with the Dr. David Bradshaw's work, Joshua Blunder, I think his work on Scotus, and J.T. Passach's work on Scotus, Scott Williams' work, his newest book on the Trinity, published by Cambridge, the Cambridge Elements series. And so Dr. Barrett did not successfully defend his views, but it is interesting that he's changed his theological views to Anglicanism, and somehow the Anglican seminary, Trinity, has already put him in a position to teach on Anglicanism, and that's very odd. I have some Anglican friends, like on Facebook. Think of Andrew Hollingsworth and Joshua Ferris and others. And my friend Michael Fitzpatrick. All my Anglican friends would say that, and I haven't, discussed this with them privately, but the ones that are public about it, they're making the point, and even Sean Luke and others, that Matthew Barrett has not been an Anglican long, and so it would be improper to put him in a position of authority so quickly when he is still learning. In some sense, he's at a catechism type stage. He's a catechumen. He is not a person that has been Anglican long. And so it's very odd to see the seminary put him in such a big position. And additionally, it's strange to see that he would, during the time that the seminary has been funding Dr. Barrett's work for his systematic theology, he would make that shift. That's very strange, that his views would shift, and the seminary, I'm sure, was paying for his sabbatical, and likely he was, for a whole year, his views have already shifted, and he did not notify the seminary until much later, likely until he secured himself a new job, a new position. But there were telling signs when, in his Credo podcast, he was defending lectionary, he was defending liturgy, he was defending some of the foundational principles of a high church tradition. And those at the Master Seminary, some of them were already, they were seeing the red flags and discussing it on Twitter. And I think this blindsided everybody, even those that were close to Dr. Barrett. It blindsided everybody, and now he's pulling everybody from some of the projects that he had others on. So he seems to no longer be ecumenical. He wants to be ecclesiastical and take a dividing stance on his theological convictions, which, he has the prerogative to do that, but it seems like the pendulum has swung the opposite direction, and he feels like this is a necessary step towards his spiritual health, which that's fine for him to do that, but it's very odd. So I pray nothing but good things for Dr. Barrett and his family. I pray this new change in his life is good, but I think, if anything, he needs to be more well-grounded in analytic theology and to study not just the Church Fathers, but contemporary Neo-Aristotelian metaphysics. He needs to look at the work of people like Ross Inman and Oliver Crisp and Michael Ray and Richard Swinburne and Brian Leftow and William Lane Craig. I mean, Peter Van Wagen. He needs to look at the work of contemporary metaphysicians to help bring clarity in his future projects. I think that would be helpful for him, because he seems to think that the Church Fathers, that metaphysics in some sense is dead, and that there's no progress that has been made. There's nothing new to offer, and that's untrue. There has been great breakthroughs in metaphysics, and I would encourage him to study deeper when it comes to philosophy of religion and metaphysics and epistemology. I think that would be very illuminating as well. But I pray for him, and I pray that this would be interesting. I don't usually speak too much in terms of these types of current events, but I felt led to. All right, well, peace and God bless.